A man took the woman he loved to a place no one saw coming, a rundown neighborhood most people would turn and leave from without a second thought. He wasn't just showing her where he lived, though. This was a test of her heart. He needed to know if she'd stay by his side, or walk away like everyone who'd come before her, and her choice would change everything between them. Sit back and let's dive right into this heartfelt story. One quiet evening in Tainan, a man named Kai slowly walked down the street with the woman he adored, Tama. The two wandered along a narrow, humble old alley. The area was peaceful, its roads bumpy and uneven, lined with weathered tin houses packed tightly together. This was where folks struggling to get by lived, people who couldn't afford proper homes. Tama glanced around slowly. What she saw was nothing like the home she'd pictured for Kai. She'd asked him several times where he lived over the past days, but Kai would always smile and change the subject. At first, she didn't think much of it, but as time went on, she started to suspect he was hiding something. Now, as they walked along in silence, she knew the truth was finally about to come out. Kai stole a quick glance at her before looking away, his heart pounding faster than normal. He never felt nervous negotiating with big business owners, nor did he hesitate closing multi-million-dollar deals. But right now, he was on edge. This wasn't about business, it was about his heart. T.S. moment would reveal whether Tama loved him for who he truly was, or only for what he appeared to be. Tama wasn't the first woman he'd brought to this old house. Over the past few months, he'd taken several women here, hoping to find someone who cared about him beyond material things. But every single one of them changed their demeanor the second they stepped foot here. Some made up quick excuses and rushed off. Others grew distant afterward and gradually faded out of his life. None of them took the time to see the real man beneath the shabby living conditions. That was why Kai's chest felt so heavy at this moment. He'd lived through this scene countless times, and he knew exactly how it usually ended. Kai came to a stop, and Tama halted beside him. They stood in front of a small, rundown single-story house. The place looked extremely shabby, its roof covered in rusted, bent tin sheets that leaked badly whenever it rained. Tall, overgrown weeds filled the yard, thick and unkempt, growing high enough to easily hide snakes and other pests, leaving the whole yard looking bleak and desolate. The front door was built from old wood and tin. The wood had rotted away over the years, and the rusted tin nailed onto the frame broke apart at the slightest touch. Kai pulled a set of keys from his pocket and unlocked the door slowly. He stepped aside and forced a faint smile. "Tama," he said softly, "welcome to my home." Tama didn't move right away. She stood in the doorway and peered inside. The walls were cracked and faded, with large patches of plaster completely fallen off to expose rough brick underneath. The wooden windows were old and rusty, their frames loose and wobbly, ready to crumble if anyone pushed them too hard. The room was tiny and cramped. A simple single bed sat on the floor, a plastic chair leaned against the wall, and a small wooden table rested in the corner. There was no electric fan, no television, no wardrobe, nothing to make the space feel warm or homey. The whole room was empty and deathly quiet. Tama stayed silent for a long while. Kai watched her expression closely, noticing the surprise, confusion, and a complicated emotion he couldn't quite decipher flash across her face. "Kai," she finally spoke up, "is this really where you live?" Kai swallowed hard and answered firmly, "It is." Tama stared at him intently, as if she was seeing him for the very first time. All along, she'd known him as a gentle, modest hard worker who dressed plainly and lived simply. But what she saw now was far beyond anything she'd imagined. "That's why you never wanted to talk about your place, isn't it?" Kai nodded slightly. He'd rehearsed this explanation long before today. "When I first moved to Tainan to make a living, I was stuck in a tough spot. I couldn't afford a better place. A friend helped me get this spot for the time being. I've just been getting by and trying to save money for the future." Tama looked around the room on C.E. Moore. She pictured him coming back here alone every night after work, sleeping on that tiny bed, sitting by himself in this quiet room, enduring all of this without saying a word. A sharp twinge of sorrow settled over her heart. "You should have told me sooner," she said, her tone laced with helplessness and sympathy. Kai hung his head, filled with guilt. Tama finally stepped inside the house. She brushed her fingers lightly against the plastic chair, then turned back to face him. "Why did you hide all of this from me? Did you think I'd laugh at you or look down on you?" Kai shook his head immediately. "No, that's never what I thought." "Then what were you afraid of?" Tama pressed. Kai let out a deep sigh. The secret weighing on his shoulders felt unbearably heavy. "I was scared," he admitted. "Scared of losing you." Tama's expression softened at once. "You shouldn't have doubted me. When two people truly care for each other, keeping secrets only hurts the both of you." Kai nodded slowly, full of regret. "I know. I'm sorry." A brief silence fell over the room. Kai held his breath, waiting for the usual reaction. In the past, this was the moment people's faces turned cold with disappointment, the moment they started pulling away from him. But things were different this time. There was no judgment or disdain in Tama's voice, only genuine care and concern. Kai was stunned, barely able to believe what he was hearing. "Wait here for a minute," he said. "I'll go grab us some cold drinks." Kai pushed his swirling thoughts aside and hurried toward a nearby convenience store, his mind filled with nervousness and hope. He bought 2 cold beverages and rushed back, but the second he pushed open the door, he froze in his tracks. The chair was empty. The room was dead silent. Tama was gone. He stood there holding the drinks in both hands, struggling to catch his breath. His eyes scanned the small room, but there was nowhere to hide. A wave of overwhelming loss crashed over him. She left, he whispered to himself. A bitter smile tugged at his lips. I should have known it would end like this again. Just as he thought history was repeating itself, Tama's voice drifted in from outside the window. Zai-kai, how do you even live in a place like this? Is there a bathroom around here? Zai-kai spun around fast. Tama was standing in the backyard, looking around the side of the house with curious eyes. She hadn't left at all. He relaxed his tense muscles and walked outside to meet her. Tama stood beside a broken low wall in the backyard, studying the entire yard carefully. When she saw him, she frowned a little and asked again, "Where's your bathroom?" Zai-kai was still recovering from the shock. He lifted a hand and pointed toward the back of the property. Over there. There's a simple restroom behind the house. Tama followed his gaze and nodded slowly. I see. She turned back to him and noticed his strange look. What's wrong? You look weird. Zai-kai hesitated for a second before being honest about his fears. When I came back and didn't see you inside, I thought you'd left me. Tama looked utterly confused. You thought I left? Yeah, Zai-kai replied plainly. Tama stared into his eyes, trying to read his emotions, then shook her head gently. Do you really believe I'd walk out on you just because of where you live? Zai-kai lowered his gaze and said nothing. Tama stepped closer and called his name softly. Zai-kai, do you think I'm that kind of shallow person? Zai-kai let out a quiet sigh and spoke from the heart. I don't know. I've seen too many cold, selfish people in my life. In that moment, Tama finally saw past his embarrassment and noticed the deep pain and unease buried in his eyes, pain built up from endless disappointments. Her heart melted completely. She moved closer and rested a hand on his arm, speaking earnestly. My feelings for you have never had anything to do with this house or how much money you have. I care about you, the person you are, not what you own or where you live. Her calm, sincere words hung thick in the air. She looked straight at him and said clearly, Zai-kai, I love you. Zai-kai froze on the spot. He'd heard those words many times before, but none had ever felt so pure and heartfelt as they did right now. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Tama smiled warmly. You don't have to say anything right now. With that, she pulled him into a gentle hug. Zai-kai stood motionless for a few seconds before slowly wrapping his arms around her. His chest was tight, not from fear this time, but from overwhelming emotion. After a moment, Tama pulled back slightly and looked at him. From now on, I'll come here with you after work. I'll stay a while before heading home. Zai-kai's eyes widened in surprise. You want to come here with me? Of course I do, she smiled, her expression bright and genuine. This is your home, and that's more than enough for me. The heavy weight that had lingered over Zai-kai for days lifted completely, and a true smile spread across his face. He held up the drinks in his hand. Come on, I got something cold for us. They walked back inside the small room. Tama sat down on the plastic chair while Zai-kai took a seat on the single bed. They opened their drinks and chatted casually, talking about work, funny little moments at the office, and stories from their pasts. Time slipped by quietly and peacefully. Later that night, Zai-kai walked Tama to a nearby bus stop. As they reached the stop, Tama turned to him. Thank you for trusting me enough to bring me here and show me your real life. Zai-kai smiled softly. I'm the one who should be thanking you. Thank you for staying. Tama smiled. Good night, Zai-kai. Good night, Tama. She stepped onto the bus and waved to him before the doors closed. Zai-kai stood there watching the bus drive off down the road until it disappeared from sight. Then he turned and walked back to the old house. Late into the night, he lay on the tiny bed inside his room, staring up at the rusted tin roof for a long time. Tama's confession echoed over and over in his mind. He rested his arms behind his head and whispered quietly to himself, I love you too, Tama. But a lingering worry gnawed at him. He was not just an ordinary office worker. He was the only son of Jay, a bar, a wealthy business tycoon based in Kaohsiung whose company operated across multiple cities. In his real life, Zai-kai lived in a grand mansion, drove luxury cars, and made major business decisions for the group. Yet here he was, lying on a thin bed in a cramped old house, pretending to be a regular struggling clerk. This whole setup was a test suggested by his father. Zai-kai had lost all faith and love after a former fiancée proved she never truly cared for him. His father believed the only way to find someone genuine was to cut all ties with wealth and status. That was why Zai-kai left his comfortable life behind and came to Tainan to live as a regular person. At first, this was only meant to be an experiment, but everything changed the day he met Tama. For the first time in a long while, someone had seen him, not knowing about his family's fortune, and chosen him anyway. Still, this beautiful genuine love had become his biggest burden. Tama truly believed he was just a regular guy trying to get by in the city. She thought this shabby house was his real home, and she believed all his struggles were real. None of it was true. Zai-kai sat up slowly and rubbed his hands together anxiously. How am I supposed to tell her the truth? He mumbled quietly. He feared that if he came clean, Tama would feel betrayed and think he'd lied to her from the very start. But if he kept hiding the truth, the lie would only grow bigger and harder to fix. He let out a deep sigh. I can't keep pretending forever. He reached for his phone, stared at the screen for a moment, then dialed his father's number. After a few rings, Jabbar picked up. My son, his father's calm voice came through the line. How are you doing? Zakai leaned back against the wall. Dad, I think I've gotten myself into trouble. Jabbar let out a soft laugh. What kind of trouble? Zakai hesitated before answering. I met a woman. Her name is Tama. I think she loves me, but she has no idea who I really am. A short silence followed on the other end of the line. Then Jabbar spoke again. So the test has turned into real feelings. Zakai glanced around the tiny room once more. Yeah, he said quietly, and I'm terrified of what will happen once she finds out the truth. There was another brief pause. Then Jabbar spoke in a steady tone. My son, fear always comes when you start to deeply care for someone. That's completely normal. Zakai listened quietly. But remember this important thing, Jabbar continued. The truth may bring temporary pain, but a lie that drags on for too long causes far greater harm. Zakai sighed softly. I know. If this woman truly loves you, Jabbar said gently, she will eventually understand why you were afraid. But when the time comes, do not keep hiding forever. Love cannot thrive when the truth is always kept secret. Zakai stared at the rusted roof again. I'll tell her soon, he promised quietly. Good, Jabbar replied. The right person won't love you onl. Why for your wealth, nor for your hardships. She will love you for who you are, deep down. The call ended, but Jabbar's words stayed fresh in Zakai's mind long after the line went dead. Deep inside, he knew one thing for certain, sooner or later, the truth had to come out. As the weeks went by, Zakai and Tama grew closer and closer. At work, they acted like nothing had changed, talking normally with their colleagues and focusing on their jobs. But the rest of the staff noticed the special bond forming between them. Sometimes they walked into the office together in the morning. Sometimes they left the building side by side in the evening. During lunch breaks, they would sit outside and talk quietly. These small moments were enough to get everyone talking around the workplace. Most co-workers just watched on out of curiosity. But one person in particular was far from happy with what he saw. Omari. Omari was a senior staff member who'd worked at the company for many years and managed several key administrative tasks. Thanks to his seniority, most junior employees feared him and tried not to get on his bad side. He was known for being strict and difficult to work with. There was another reason Omari disliked what was happening, though. A few months prior, he'd tried to pursue Tama and make a move on her. Tama had politely turned him down. Ever since that day, Omari couldn't stand seeing her with another man, especially someone he saw as nothing more than a poor low-level CLE. RK. That was why his attitude toward Zakai grew worse by the day. One afternoon, while most employees were busy at their desks, Omari called out loudly across the room. Zakai. Zakai looked up from the files he was organizing. Yes, sir. Get over here, Omari ordered. Zakai walked over to his desk. Omari pointed to a large stack of documents on his table. Take these files down to the storage room. Zakai nodded. Yes, sir. He picked up the files and did as he was told. A few minutes later, Omari called for him again. Zakai. Zakai returned to his desk. Yes, sir. Grab me a bottle of water. Zakai headed to the small office kitchen and brought back a bottle of water. Omari took the water, then said, now clean off this desk. Zakai paused for a moment. He'd already finished most of his work for the day, but he knew arguing would only create more trouble. He quietly picked up a duster and cleaned the desk. Omari leaned back in his chair and watched him with a smug look. You think you're somebody important around here? He suddenly asked. Zakai looked up, staying calm. No, sir. Omari let out a laugh. Good, because you're nothing here. Zakai didn't reply, but his patience was wearing thin inside. You should be grateful you even have a job here, Omari added. Zakai took a slow breath and spoke calmly. Sir, I respect your position, but I ask that you show me respect in return. The entire office fell silent in an instant. Omari's smile vanished. Completely. What did you just say? I only said we should treat each other with mutual respect, Zakai answered evenly. Omari stood up quickly. How dare you talk back to me, he shouted. He grabbed Zakai by the front of his shirt. Apologize right now. Zakai held his ground. I haven't done anything wrong. Omari's anger flared up even more. Say you're sorry, he yelled again. Zakai shook his head slightly. I will not apologize for asking to be treated like a human being. Without warning, Omari raised his hand and slapped Zakai hard across the cheek. The sharp sound echoed through the whole office, and everyone froze in place. Zakai held his stinging cheek but did not fight back. At that exact moment, a sharp, firm voice cut through the silence. Is this how you treat people here? It was Tama. She'd stepped out of her office after hearing the commotion. Her eyes moved from Omari to Zakai's injured face. What are you doing? She demanded. Omari frowned. This doesn't concern you. Tama stepped forward confidently. It concerns me when someone is being treated unfairly. Omari hesitated. Tama kept her tone firm. If you lay a hand on him again, man, I'll report this to upper management. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Omari slowly let go of Zakai's shirt. He glanced around and realized every single co-worker was watching. After a moment of hesitation, he sat back down in his chair. Zakai straightened his shirt quietly. Tama walked over to him. GHT away. Are you okay? Zakai nodded. I'm fine. Inside, though, his heart felt heavy. It wasn't the slap that bothered him. It was the sight of Tama standing up for him, completely unaware of who he really was. Seeing her defend the man she thought was a powerless regular clerk made the secret he was hiding feel even heavier on his heart. Later that evening, after the incident at work, Zakai couldn't stop replaying what had happened. The sound of the slap still rang in his ears. But what troubled him most wasn't the humiliation. It was Tama. The way she'd stepped forward without a second thought. The way she'd defended him in front of everyone. She'd acted bravely, believing she was protecting a man with no influence in that office. Zakai sat quietly on the small bed inside the old house. The room was calm, but his thoughts were racing non-stop. He looked around the tiny space once more. For months, he'd lived in this rundown house, pretending this was his real life. All of it had started as a simple test, but now the test was no longer simple at all. Tama had become far more than just a part of the experiment. She was someone he truly cared about. Zakai leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. How do I tell her the truth? He wondered. If he revealed everything, Tama would likely feel betrayed and believe he'd lied to her from the very beginning. If he kept hiding the truth, the lie would only keep growing. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Zakai looked up. Tama? Yes, her voice came from outside. He stood up quickly and opened the door. Tama stepped inside. Zakai had left the office earlier than her that day, and she assumed it was because of the fight that had broken out at work. She studied his face carefully. I've been thinking about what happened today. Zakai closed the door slowly. It's nothing. I'm alright. Tama shook her head. No, you're not. She walked further into the room and sat down on the plastic chair. You shouldn't let people treat you like that. Zakai offered a faint smile. Sometimes it's easier to just stay quiet. Tama looked at him with a serious expression. You deserve respect, Zakai. Her words touched him deeply. If she knew the truth about his background, the entire situation would be completely different. Tama studied his face for a moment longer. You've had a lot on your mind lately. Zakai hesitated, then asked a question that had been weighing on his heart for days. Tama, what would you do if the person you love was hiding something important from you? Tama frowned. Hiding something? Yes, something big. Tama thought about it for a moment. If the secret hurt me, she said slowly, I'd feel disappointed. But I'd still want to understand why they kept it hidden. Zakai looked at her silently. Tama smiled gently. Everyone has things they're afraid to talk about. Her kindness made the secret inside Zakai's heart feel even heavier. After Tama left that night, Zakai picked up his phone and called his father again. Jabbar answered after a few rings. My son, Jabbar said calmly. How is everything going? Zakai let out a tired sigh. Dad, this is getting really hard. Jabbar fell silent for a moment. Tell me why. Zakai rubbed his forehead. Tama trusts me completely, but she has no idea who I really am. Jabbar spoke slowly. You knew this day would come. I know, Zakai replied, but I'm terrified of hurting her. Jabbar sighed softly on the other end of the line. My son, the truth always finds its way out sooner or later. Zakai leaned back against the wall. I just hope that when that moment comes, she'll still look at me the same way. The next morning, Zakai woke up much earlier than usual. He'd barely slept a wink all night. He sat up slowly on the small bed. He'd made up his mind. I'm going to tell her today, he said to himself. When he arrived at the office, Tama was already sitting at her desk. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. Good morning, Zakai. Good morning, he replied. Tama noticed his odd demeanor right away. You look really serious today. Is everything alright? Zakai nodded slowly. I'm fine, but I have something important I need to talk to you about later. Tama looked curious. Something important? Yes, he said quietly. Alright, she replied. We can talk during lunch break. Zakai nodded, but his heart was still filled with restlessness. The workday dragged on slowly. When lunchtime finally arrived, he and Tama stepped outside the company building to talk. He looked at her. Tama, there's something I need to Zakai. Omari's sharp voice cut him off suddenly. Go get those new onboarding files from the storage room right now. I'm on my lunch break, Zakai replied calmly. I'll handle it later. Omari's face turned red with anger instantly. Who do you think you are, talking to me like that? Before Zakai could respond, Omari stepped forward and grabbed a tight hold of his shirt collar. Several nearby employees stopped what they were doing and turned to watch. You think you can speak to me that way? Omari shouted. Zakai stayed calm. I only said I'll do the work after my break. Omari's rage grew worse by the second. At that moment, Tama rushed forward. What are you doing? She yelled. She moved quickly toward them and tried to push Omari away. Omari frowned. Stay out of this, Tama. He pushed her back with his free hand. Tama stared at him angrily. Stop this right now, she said firmly. The the area went dead quiet. But Omari still refused to let go of Zay Kai's shirt. Just then, two sleek black luxury vehicles slowly pulled into the company parking lot. The cars came to a stop, and men dressed in formal suits stepped out first. Then the door of the second car opened, and an elderly man stepped out with a calm, commanding presence. The second the senior staff members saw him, their expressions shifted dramatically. "It's the chairman," someone whispered. Jabbar looked around the property slowly, then his gaze landed on the scene unfolding outside the office. His eyes moved to Zay Kai, then to Omari, who still had a grip on Zay Kai's shirt. Completely unaware of Jabbar's arrival, Omari held his ground. Jabbar walked forward with quiet authority. When he reached the group, he spoke in a firm voice. "Zay Kai, what is going on here?" The entire office complex fell completely. Why silent? Zay Kai could feel every single person staring at him. In that moment, he realized the terrible truth he'd been dreading. The secret he'd spent so long hiding was about to be exposed for everyone to see. The whole office stood frozen. Everyone's eyes darted back and forth between Zay Kai and the elderly man who'd just arrived. A few employees had already recognized Jabbar, the powerful chairman of the company. What confused them most was the way he'd call out to Zay Kai, just like a father calling to his son. Tama stood beside Zay Kai, struggling to make sense of what was happening. Her eyes moved slowly from Jabbar to Zay Kai. "Zay Kai," she said softly, "do you know him?" Zay Kai's heart raced wildly. He'd imagined telling Tama the truth dozens of times, but never like this, never in front of the entire staff. Jabbar looked at Zay Kai carefully. "My son," he said in a steady tone, "I asked you a question. I came to inspect this branch and check on you. You've been here for a long time now. Tell me what's happening here." The words "my son" echoed across the parking lot like a loud bell. People began whispering instantly. Did he just call him his son? This can't be real. Tama's face paled with total shock. Her eyes widened as she looked at Zay Kai again. "You're his son," someone repeated quietly. Omari's stomach twisted into a tight knot. He remembered every time he'd ordered Zay Kai around, every insult he'd thrown his way, every time he'd treated him like he was worthless. Fear crept over him little by little. Zay Kai finally found his voice. "Father," he said quietly. The entire area went even quieter. There was no longer any room for doubt. The simple office clerk everyone had pushed around was actually the chairman's only son. Jabbar turned to the senior staff members. "Exactly what is going on here?" he demanded with authority. Before anyone could answer, Omari stepped forward nervously. "Sir, it was just a small misunderstanding," he rushed to say, but Jabbar's sharp eyes had already seen the tension. His expression hardened slowly. He turned his gaze back to Omari. "What kind of misunderstanding leads you to grab another employee by the shirt like that?" Omari's voice cracked. I didn't know he was your son." Jabbar's tone turned colder. "That is not the point." The parking lot fell completely silent. "No employee at this company deserves to be disrespected," Jabbar continued, "whether they are the chairman's son or the newest hire on staff." Omari hung his head, unable to say a word. Jabbar looked at him once more. "Until management reviews the situation, you are relieved of all your duties," he stated firmly. Omari stood there in pure shock. "Yes, sir," he mumbled before stepping away slowly. Jabbar immediately walked into the office building to meet with the branch manager, which was the main reason he'd come to begin with. But Tama paid no attention to any of that. Her whole world had gone quiet all at once. Luke, deep back at Zay Kai, the simple hard-working man she thought she knew, the man who'd shown her a life of struggle and hardship, the man she'd trusted with all her heart. "You," she said, her voice trembling. "You're the chairman's son." Zay Kai couldn't look away from her eyes. "I am," he answered quietly. Tama didn't know how to feel in that moment. Confusion, shock, and deep disappointment washed over her all at once. "All this time," she said slowly, her voice shaking, "all this time, you let me believe you were just a poor clerk." Zay Kai tried to speak. "Tama, I was going to tell you." Tama lifted her hand gently to stop him. "Please," she said, tears filling her eyes. "Just stop." The world around her faded away. All she could think about was one thing. "You made me believe your life was a constant struggle," she said in a calm, emotional voice. "You made me believe that old house, that tiny room, was your real home." Zay Kai took a step closer. "I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to find out if someone could love me when money wasn't part of the picture." Tama shook her head slowly. "That was not your choice to make," she replied. Her voice stayed calm, but it was full of hurt. "You took away my right to choose." Zay Kai stood frozen, not knowing what to say. Her words hurt him far more than he'd expected. "I trusted you," Tama cut in, tears rolling down her cheeks. "And the entire time, you were just testing me." The silence between them sun was heavy and unbearable. Finally, Tama stepped back. "I need some space," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked away. Zai couldn't move an inch. The truth he'd feared had finally come out, and the moment he'd dreaded most was here too. Tama was gone, and he had no idea if she would ever forgive him. Just then, Zai felt a hand rest on his shoulder. He turned around to see his father, Jabbar. "What happened?" Jabbar asked with concern. "She left," Zai said, his voice filled with emotion. Jabbar squeezed his arm gently and took a deep breath before speaking. "Don't worry, everything will work out. You'll see her again." A few moments later, Zai followed his father into the luxury vehicle, and they drove away. The days that followed felt long and agonizing for Zai. Even though he'd returned to Kaohsiung with his father, his mind stayed in Tainan, stuck back at that office, stuck on the moment Tama had walked away from him. Back at home, everything was just as it had always been: the massive mansion, the expensive cars, the quiet luxury he'd grown up around. But none of it brought him any comfort whatsoever. One evening, as he sat alone in the living room, Jabbar walked in and sat down beside him. "You're still thinking about her," Jabbar said gently. Zai sighed. "I am." Jabbar nodded slowly. "I made a mistake," he said. "I pushed you into this test. I thought it would protect you." Zai shook his head. "No, father, the test didn't fail." Jabbar looked confused. "What do you mean?" Zai leaned back in his chair. "She loved me when she thought I had nothing," he said softly. "That means her love was genuine." Jabbar nodded. "But you hurt her too." "I know," Zai replied. Across the city, Tama was also struggling with her own thoughts. Every night, she replayed the scene at the office over and over again in her head, the moment she realized Zai was not the man she thought he was. At first, she felt angry and betrayed. But as the days passed, a different feeling slowly took hold: understanding. She thought back to the way Zai had looked at her, the way he'd listened whenever she spoke, the way he'd always treated her with kindness. None of those things had felt fake at all. One afternoon, while she sat quietly in her office, Tama received an official notice. Jabbar had arranged for her to be transferred to the company's main headquarters after the incident in Tainan. On top of that, he'd given her a promotion and arranged fully furnished housing so she could settle comfortably in the city. A week later, Tama started her new job at the headquarters. That morning, while she was getting settled into her new office, a message arrived from the chairman's office. The note was short and simple: "Please come to the CEO's office." Tama took a deep breath, stood up, and walked slowly toward the executive office. When she stepped inside, she was completely surprised by what she saw. Zai was already there. They sat in silence for a moment, neither one speaking. The quiet between them held weeks' worth of tangled emotions. Jabbar stood up calmly. "I'll leave the two of you to talk," he said, then walked out of the room. Zai stood up slowly and walked over to Tama. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. Tama looked at him. There was no longer anger in her eyes, but the pain was still there. "You should have trusted me," she said. "I know," Zai replied. "I thought I was protecting myself," he continued. "But in the end, I only hurt you." Tama took a slow breath. "I was angry at first," she admitted. "But then I started thinking about everything we shared." She looked straight into his eyes. "You never treated me like you were trying to impress me. You treated me like someone you truly cared about." Zai nodded. "Because I do care about you." There was a long pause. Then Tama stepped closer. "I forgive you." Zai's shoulders relaxed, as if a huge weight had finally been lifted off his chest. "Tama," he said quietly, "thank you." She smiled. "But don't ever test my heart like that again," she added. Zai smiled for the first time in many days. "I promise," he said. A few months later, their lives had changed in many ways, but their love had grown even stronger. One evening, Zai took Tama to a quiet, elegant restaurant. After dinner, he stood up slowly and dropped down onto one knee. Tama looked at him in complete surprise. Zai opened a small ring box. "Tama," he said gently, "you loved me when you believed I had absolutely nothing. I will never forget that for as long as I live. All my life, I've met people who only cared about the lifestyle around me, the cars, the houses, the money. But you saw none of that. You saw a man who was struggling, a man with very little, and still Tade. You cared for me. You stood up for me. You loved me unconditionally." Tama's eyes glistened with emotion. "You made me feel something I'd nearly forgotten," Zai went on quietly. "Peace. When I was with you, I didn't feel like a businessman or the son of a powerful man. I just felt like myself. And somehow, that was enough for you. You made me feel safe. You made me feel loved. For the first time in my life, I truly understand what it means to share your life with someone who loves you for who you are, not for what you own." He took a slow breath and smiled. "I can't imagine walking through this life without you by my side. Will you marry me?" "Yes, I will marry you, Zai," she answered, her voice filled with joy and emotion. Zai slipped the ring gently onto her finger and stood up, grinning with pure happiness. He pulled her close into a warm embrace. The other guests in the restaurant smiled and applauded for them. Even as they held each other tight, Zai's eyes stayed locked on Tama. 3 months later, their wedding day arrived. The grand hall was filled with family, friends, and co-workers. Fresh flowers flowers decorated every corner, and soft music filled the air. Zakai stood proudly beside Tama as they exchanged their wedding vows. Across the room, Jabbar watched on with a warm smile. His son had finally found what he'd been searching for all along, not wealth, not power, but something far more precious, true love. And this time, it was real. Hello to all my wonderful viewers. True love is never about money or comfort. It's about seeing someone's heart and choosing to stay. What do you think about this story? Do you believe Tama made the right choice? Share your thoughts down in the comments. I would love to read what you have to say. A brand new exciting story will be coming out in a few days, so make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on your notification bell so you never miss an upload. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button and share it with your friends. Thank you so much for watching.